Sugar is harmless if diluted like in fresh fruits. Article published in Clinical Nutrition Aspen 2019, 31:23-27. Evolutionary physiology shows the need for an unprecedented study on sugar. Riccardo Baschetti. Summary. Many experimental studies on sugar, sucrose, omitted its form of ingestion. Often their findings were mutually incompatible. A comparison of the results of the few studies that administered sugar in a single specified form suggests that the metabolic effects of sugar depend on its form of ingestion, because even 80% of calories as diluted sugar proved harmless, but only 30% of calories as undiluted sugar proved harmful. These opposite effects of sugar can be explained by the published hypothesis that evolution adapted genetically our ancestors to cope with sugar only in diluted forms, because prehistorically diluted sugar was available abundantly in fresh fruits, but undiluted sugar was inexistent. The purpose of this review, based mainly on the evolutionary interpretation of published data of physiology, is to encourage researchers to perform an unprecedented experimental study to compare the metabolic effects of diluted sugar with the effects of undiluted sugar. The data of physiology analyzed in this review suggest that the absorption of diluted sugar within the caloric range of total sugars diluted in fresh fruits is slow and calorie constant, thus preserving blood glucose homeostasis, whereas the absorption of concentrated sugar exceeding that caloric range is rapid, which can disrupt blood glucose homeostasis. Dietary salt, which was unknown to prehistoric humans, unnaturally accelerates the absorption of sugars. This can explain the harmful effects attributed to sugar-sweetened beverages per se, because these drinks are generally co-ingested with foods containing salt, which partly yet unavoidably passes into those beverages, thereby unhealthily accelerating their absorption. Introduction. Many experimental studies on sugar omitted its form of ingestion. 1. These omissions can explain why several results of those studies are mutually incompatible. 1. Their discrepant findings can be explained by comparing the results of the few studies that administered sugar in a single form and specified it. 1. For example, after giving sugar only in diluted form, some authors wrote, the feeding of 80% of calories as sucrose did not lead to an impairment of the GDT glucose tolerance test in any subject. 2, p. 600, antithetically, after giving only 30% of calories as undiluted sugar, others wrote, sucrose feeding produces undesirable changes in several of the parameters associated with glucose tolerance. 3, p. 2206. These contradictory findings and the omissions mentioned above can explain why studies that have examined the addition of sucrose to the diet of non-insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, NIDDM, subjects for periods of 2 to 6 weeks have produced conflicting results. 4, p. 474. Conflicting results between studies on sugar also regard its effects on cholesterol and triglycerides. Indeed, several authors have reported no change in plasma cholesterol in response to sucrose, even when sucrose was given as a very high proportion of the diet, 11 to 65% of energy. In contrast, in other studies, plasma cholesterol concentrations were observed to rise in response to sucrose consumption within a broad range, 18–52% of energy, 5, p. 251s. Additionally, as some authors wrote, there is evidence from several well-controlled prospective studies demonstrating that the consumption of moderate amounts of sucrose may result in hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, hypertriglyceridemia, hypercholesterolemia, and reduced high-density lipoprotein cholesterol concentrations. The fact that not all studies demonstrate these deleterious effects does not negate the positive data. 6, p. 62. Those discrepancies between studies 5, p. 251s, besides causing considerable debate concerning the effects of sucrose on plasmolipids and in particular triglyceride levels 7, p. 498, also understandably resulted in medical guidelines that could hardly be more discrepant. 1. Indeed, most conflictingly, some guidelines recommend that the ingestion of sugar should not exceed 5% of energy requirement. 8, whereas other guidelines imply that even 25% of total energy can safely derive from sugar. 8. As the issue of dietary sucrose must assume a prominent role in the discussion of the dietary treatment of diabetes. 6. P. 62, which is becoming the plague of the 21st century. 9. It has been proposed to perform an unprecedented experimental study aimed at clarifying the real effects of sugar intake on human health by directly comparing the metabolic effects of diluted sugar with the metabolic effects of undiluted sugar. 1. The following rationale based on evolutionary physiology highlights the scientific advisability to conduct that unprecedented research. Rationale for the unprecedented study on sugar. As the thoughtful article Evolutionary Physiology 10 correctly underlined, physiologists are interested in how organisms work. A subset of physiologists also wants to know why organisms are designed to work in particular ways. Unless one assumes special creation of all organisms, an understanding of such why questions requires an evolutionary perspective. 10, p. 581. This perspective reveals that bodies are not designed, they are shaped by natural selection. 11, p. 42. By implication, one of the most important influences affecting genetic selection and adaptation is the interaction between a species and its food supply. 12, p. 814. In line with the view that medicine needs evolution. 13, because nothing in medicine makes sense, except in the light of evolution. 14, two correlated hypotheses have been advanced. 1, 15. These hypotheses inspired by evolutionary theorizing, which points to hypotheses that we otherwise might not even think of. 16, p. 642, are based on the idea that evolution adapted genetically the metabolic physiology of our ancestors to cope with sugar only in diluted forms, because prehistorically diluted sugar was available abundantly in fresh fruits but undiluted sugar was inexistent. 1, 15. Those hypotheses 1, 15 posit that evolutionarily conserved physiological traits make diluted sugar harmless and undiluted sugar harmful. The evolutionary conservation of ancestrally selected physiological traits is likely, because humans are not self-made creations dietarily, but rather have an evolutionary history as anthropoid primates stretching back more than 25 million years, a history that shaped their nutrient requirements and digestive physiology well before they were humans or even proto-humans. In hominoids, features such as nutrient requirements and digestive physiology appear to be genetically conservative. 17, p. 665. Given that modern humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor who was chimp-like, forest-dwelling, and predominantly arboreal and fruit-eating between 5 and 8 million years ago. 18, p. 219, evolutionary reasoning forces us to realize that available food shapes all species, and we were shaped by the fruit of the tree. 19, p. 737, because we are what we ate. 18. Considering that during the Miocene era, from about 24 to about 5 million years ago, fruits appear to have been the main dietary constituent for hominids. 20, p. 284, the most compelling explanation for the otherwise puzzlingly conflicting results of many studies on sugar 1 to 6 emerges from the following data of physiology interpreted in the light of evolution. Importantly, gastric emptying is a major factor in blood glucose homeostasis, in normal subjects and in patients with diabetes. 21, p. 857. Diluted glucose and diluted sucrose, which is a mixture of glucose and fructose. 22, empty identically from the stomach. 22, because the effects of sucrose and a glucose and fructose mixture are indistinguishable, in slowing gastric emptying. 22, p. 323-4. The gastric emptying of diluted glucose is a linear function. 23, p. 78, i.e., it is a slow and calorie constant emptying pattern. 23, p. 76, which proceeds progressively more slowly with increasing concentrations. 24, pr 254. For this reason, glucose empties so as to maintain a constant rate of delivery of calories to the small intestine over a range of energy densities of 0.2 to 1.0 kcal/ml. 24, pr 256. as this range virtually overlaps the caloric range of total sugars diluted in fresh fruits 1, which were the main food of humankind's ancestors for millions of years 18 to 20. Intuition tells us that human gastrointestinal physiology is evolutionarily adapted to the wide caloric range of fresh fruits, to preserve blood glucose homeostasis 1. One might object that intuition is unreliably subjective and thus scientifically valueless. However, as Albert Einstein famously pointed out, the only real valuable thing is intuition. Thanks to evolutionarily conserved physiological traits adapted to fresh fruits, although gastric emptying slowed as glucose concentration increased, when gastric emptying was expressed as the rate of calories delivered to the intestine, all three glucose solutions emptied at indistinguishable rates 23, p78. Within the range 0.2 to 1.0 kcal/ml, doubling the volume of a glucose meal does not significantly alter the rate of emptying 24, pr256. This suggests that even the ingestion of large quantities of fresh fruits did not affect the glucose homeostasis of humankind's ancestors 1. Notably, the number of glucose calories passed per unit time, 2.13 kilocalories per minute, remain the same over a five-fold concentration range 23, p78. Within this range, 0.2 to 1.0 kcal/ml, such constancy suggests in humans, as in the monkey, that glucose emptying differs from the emptying of physiological saline in being subject to tight regulation 23, p80. In sharp contrast with the slow and calorie constant emptying pattern of diluted glucose 23, 24, the gastric emptying of concentrated glucose is rapid, because when glucose concentration exceeds 1.0 kcal/ml, gastric emptying does not slow further. As a result, with each increment in concentration above 1.0 kcal/ml, there is more rapid delivery of calories to the small bowel, i.e., a loss of regulation to caloric concentration 24, pr256. This loss of regulation occurring exactly above the highest caloric concentration of fresh fruits 1 suggests that undiluted sugars are genetically unknown foods 15. Indeed, although humankind's ancestors occasionally ate honey, which was rare before apiculture, its sporadic and scanty ingestion could not modify the genetic physiological molding produced by the daily and plentiful ingestion of fresh fruits 1. With respect to dried fruits, which by far exceed the caloric range of fresh fruits, presumably they were rarer than honey in the relatively heavily wooded habitats 25, p368, of humankind's ancestors, because of the frequent tropical equatorial rains and the shade of those thick forests 1. The data of physiology recalled above suggest that even 80% of calories as diluted sugar did not impair glucose tolerance in any subject 2 because the intestinal absorption of sugar was slow and calorie constant, which preserved blood glucose homeostasis, whereas only 30% of calories as undiluted sugar affected undesirably glucose tolerance 3 because the absorption of sugar was rapid, which disrupted blood glucose homeostasis. Although some millennia ago an incipient agriculture and apiculture enabled humankind to consume undiluted sugars rather frequently, these concentrated carbohydrates still remain genetically unknown foods 15, because the introduction of agriculture and animal husbandry about 10,000 years ago occurred too recently on an evolutionary time scale for the human genome to adjust 26, p341. Therefore, genetically speaking, humans today live in a nutritional environment that differs from that for which our genetic constitution was selected 27, ps10. Consequently, from a genetic standpoint, humans living today are Stone Age hunter-gatherers 28, p739, which can explain why a recent systematic review and meta-analysis concluded that the Paleolithic diet resulted in greater short-term improvements in metabolic syndrome components than did guideline-based control diets 29, p922. Dietary salt accelerates the absorption of sugars. Prehistorically, dietary salt, sodium chloride, NaCl, was unknown. Indeed, the diet of early humans was unsalted, and the Na content of breast milk, 6 mol/kg, shows how little NaCl is needed even during the most rapid period of growth 30, ps 35. As was rightly observed, salt appetite is not to be equated with salt requirement 31, p 151, because some Indians whose diet is unsalted 31 are physically a highly active people 31, p 150. Of note, humans began to use large amounts of salt for the main purpose of food preservation approximately 5,000 years ago 32, p 83. This period is brief, by evolutionary standards, and thus, there has been little time for the physiologic systems to adapt 33, p 45e. As a consequence, dietary salt causes many harmful effects in addition to hypertension 34. Another harmful effect of dietary salt is its capacity to turn the slow and calorie-constant absorption of diluted sugars into a rapid absorption, because at low concentrations the addition of sodium chloride to test meals increased the rate of gastric emptying 35, p 268. This occurs because sodium ion greatly facilitates glucose uptake 36, p 1228. Consequently, sodium ion increases the rate of absorption of glucose 22, p 318. Hence, even a small amount of NaCl in the solutions can potentiate intestinal absorption of sugars 37, p 558. Unsurprisingly, therefore, the addition of sodium chloride enhances the glycemic response to glucose ingestion through facilitation of intestinal absorption 38, p 458. That enhanced glycemic response resulting from the addition of dietary salt can explain the association between sugar-sweetened beverages, SSBs, intake and type 2 diabetes 39, 40, because the consumption of sugar-sweetened soft drink is associated with reduced vegetable and milk consumption, typically low-salt foods, and higher consumption of fast food and fried meats and fried snacks, e.g., hamburgers and French fries, typically high-salt foods, 41, p 19. Intuitively, in the stomach at least a small amount of the dietary salt contained in those high-salt foods unavoidably passes into SSBs, thereby unhealthily accelerating their absorption. This unnaturally accelerated absorption, besides probably accounting for other harmful effects attributed to SSBs intake per SE 42 to 44, can also explain why the consumption of SSBs is associated with obesity, 241. Some studies did report that this association is mediated by dietary salt, but they omitted to mention the harmful accelerating effect of salt on the absorption of sugars 41, 45, 46. Conclusions. As The Lancet has recently emphasized in a timely editorial 47 written to introduce 3 articles on the medical implications of an evolutionary perspective 48 to 50, evolution is perhaps the most basic scientific theory. Some would say it is the most powerful. And yet its application to health and medicine is vastly underutilized 47. Indeed, the value of evolutionary analyses of human physiology is only beginning to be recognized in the field of public health 48, p 500. Therefore, it is to be hoped that those recent evolution-promoting articles published in The Lancet 48 to 50 and the evolutionary analysis of human physiology expounded in the present article will encourage some researchers to perform the unprecedented dietary trial aimed at comparing the metabolic effects of diluted sugar with the metabolic effects of undiluted sugar. The present article and 2 hypotheses based on evolutionary reasoning 1. 15 theoretically predict that a given quantity of sugar will prove harmless if it is ingested in diluted forms within 1.0 kcal/ml, i.e., 250 grams of sugar per liter, but the same quantity of sugar will prove harmful if it is ingested in forms exceeding 1.0 kcal/ml. Appendix. This appendix may be useful to researchers who could be willing to perform the unprecedented study discussed above. Precisely because of its unprecedentedness, this study should have a simple design and should be relatively inexpensive, thereby encouraging researchers and funders to plan other studies aimed at replicating its findings, because replicating studies is important, as an editorial of The Lancet rightly pointed out 51. Indeed, in the present case, should other studies confirm that diluted sugar is harmless and undiluted sugar is harmful, then humankind will soon be healthier, by adhering to new and better medical guidelines regarding sugar. One of the simplest designs of that unprecedented research on diluted sugar versus undiluted sugar could assess whether these different forms of ingesting sugar produce different effects on triglycerides and cholesterol. These lipids are notoriously the main culprits of the significant relationship between added sugar consumption and increased risk for CVD cardiovascular disease mortality 52, p. 516. This exhaustively commented 53 to 58 relationship might be inaccurate, however, because the study that reported it 52 failed to distinguish diluted sugar from undiluted sugar. The volunteers who participated in some studies on sugar were 1259, 960, or only 861. Therefore, 10 healthy adult normal weight volunteers may well suffice as participants in the unprecedented study on sugar. As its findings will theoretically depend on gastric emptying, the volunteers should be male, because there are gender differences in gastric emptying 62, 63. Useful suggestions for the experimental protocol of that unprecedented study can be drawn from a research of Reiser et al. 64, who found that total serum lipids, triglycerides, and total cholesterol levels were significantly higher when the subjects consumed the sucrose diet than when they consumed the starch diet 64, p. 1659. Although the sucrose diet of Reiser et al. Included 210 g of sucrose 64, such a copious quantity of sucrose is unnecessary in the unprecedented study discussed here. In this novel research, therefore, a diet including 100 g of sucrose should suffice to determine whether this quantity of sucrose is harmless in diluted form and harmful in undiluted form. The participants in the study of Reiser et al. 64 consumed the sucrose diet during the first 6-week period. After a 4-week rest period, the starch diet was consumed during the second 6-week period 64, p. 1661. Similarly, the participants in the unprecedented study under discussion should consume a diet including 100 g of diluted sucrose during the first 6-week period. After a 4-week rest period, 100 g of undiluted sucrose should be included in the diet during the second 6-week period. Importantly, during the experimental periods, the volunteers should keep their usual eating habits unchanged except for breakfast. Indeed, in the fasting state, as a sole breakfast, the participants should consume only 100 g of diluted sucrose during the first 6-week period, whereas they should consume 100 g of undiluted sucrose during the second 6-week period. This undiluted sucrose, to be ingested more easily, can be in the form of lumps, which practically would have the same facilitating role of the sucrose patty 64, p. 1661, used by Reiser et al. 64 to make the ingestion of undiluted sucrose easier. Although diluted sugar, as argued in the main text, is theoretically harmless even if its concentration is 1000 kilocalories per liter, this high and somewhat unrealistic caloric density is unworthy to be used in the unprecedented study under discussion. It is more realistic to use a caloric concentration of 500 kilocalories per liter, because this caloric density is approximately comparable to the highest caloric concentration of various industrial beverages containing added sucrose. In fact, the sugar content of colas, soft drinks, fruit punches, 100% fruit juices, and liquid shakes is about 10 to 12 g/100 g 65, p. 658. Therefore, during the first experimental period, the volunteers should ingest as a breakfast only 100 g of sucrose diluted homogeneously in a quantity of water abundant enough to result in 800 ml of sweetened beverage. Should the participants find it difficult to drink such a large sugared solution in one swallow, they can sip it gradually in tens of minutes, because the metabolic equivalence of gorging and sipping, in the context of the gastric emptying of diluted sugars, can be clearly inferred from the above-mentioned physiological fact that doubling the volume of a glucose meal does not significantly alter the rate of emptying 24, pr. 256. As discussed in the main text, the postulated metabolic difference between ingesting diluted sucrose and ingesting undiluted sucrose would reflect their different rates of gastric emptying. Therefore, it is experimentally essential to prevent intragastric and metabolic interferences that could result in misleading findings by altering the normal process of gastric emptying. Bearing in mind that 100 g of diluted sucrose provide 400 kilocalories and considering that the rate of gastric emptying of diluted sugars is presumably a function of the oxidation of the exogenous glucose 62-63, the volunteers should not ingest any other substance, excluding plain water if thirst occurs, for at least 4 hours after the ingestion of diluted sucrose. Indeed, it can reasonably be estimated that an adult normal weight male volunteer at rest oxidizes about 100 kilocalories per hour. Of note, as was suggested on theoretical grounds, it is probably the oxidation of the exogenous glucose that regulates the intestinal absorption 62-63, which, in turn, determines the rate of gastric emptying. In fact, it is the rate of absorption of nutrients by the small intestine that is the most important factor in controlling gastric emptying. 66. References. 1. Baschetti. Our evolutionary legacy, form of ingestion, not quantity, is the key factor in producing the effects of sugar on human health. Med Hypotheses 2004, 63, 933-938. 2. Anderson J.W., Herman R.H., Zokim D. Effect of high glucose and high sucrose diets on glucose tolerance of normal men. A.M.J. Klein Nutter 1973, 26, 600-607. 3. Reiser S., Handler H.B., Gardner L.B., Hallfrisch J.G., Michaelis O.E., Prather E.S. Isocaloric exchange of dietary starch and sucrose in humans. 2. Effect on fasting blood insulin, glucose, and glucagon and on insulin and glucose response to a sucrose load. A.M.J. Klein Nutter 1979, 32, 2206-2216. 4. Colagier I.S., Miller J.J., Edwards R.A. Metabolic effects of adding sucrose and aspartame to the diet of subjects with non-insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. A.M.J. Klein Nutter 1989, 50, 474-478. 5. Frayne K.N., Kingman S.M. Dietary sugars and lipid metabolism in humans. A.M.J. Klein Nutter 1995, 62, 250-261. 6. Hollenbeck C.B., Colston A.M., Revan G.M. Effects of sucrose on carbohydrate and lipid metabolism in NIDDM patients. Diabetes Care 1989, 12, 62-66. 7. Smith J.B., Niven B., Manji. The effect of reduced extrinsic sucrose intake on plasma triglyceride levels. Ure J. Klein Nutter 1996, 50, 498-504. 8. Gibson S., Gunn P., Whitkind A., Cottrell R. The Effects of Sucrose on Metabolic Health, a Systematic Review of Human Intervention Studies in Healthy Adults. Crit Rev Food Sci Nutter 2013, 53, 591-614. 9. Editorial. Diabetes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Lancet 2015, 386, 932. 10. Garland J.R.T., Carter P.A. Evolutionary Physiology. Anu Rev Physiol 1994, 56, 579-621. 11. Nis R.M., Stearns S.C. The Great Opportunity, Evolutionary Applications to Medicine and Public Health. EVOLAPPL 2008, 1, 28-48. 12. Eaton S.B. Humans, Lipids, and Evolution. Lipids 1992, 27, 814-820. 13. Nis R.M., Stearns S.C., Oman G.S. Medicine Needs Evolution. Science 2006, 311, 1071. 14 Varkia. Nothing in medicine makes sense, except in the light of evolution. J. Mole Med 2012, 90, 481-494. 15 Baschetti. Are diabetes epidemic in newly westernized populations, is it due to thrifty genes or to genetically unknown foods? JRSOC Med 1998, 91, 622-625. 16 Connor M. A Dose of Dr. Darwin. Nature 1995, 375, 641-642. 17 Milton K. Hunter-Gatherer Diets, a Different Perspective. AMJ Klein Nutter 2000, 71, 665-667. 18 Woodby, Brooks, A Human Evolution. We Are What We Ate. Nature 1999, 400, 219-220. 19 Hackett E. The Fruit People. Part 1. Med J. Ost 1984, 141, 736-738. 20 Eaton S.B., Connor M. Paleolithic Nutrition. A Consideration of its Nature and Current Implications. An English J. Med 1985, 312, 283-289. 21 Horowitz M., Edelbrock Ma, Wisher J. M., Strathoff J. W. Relationship between oral glucose tolerance and gastric emptying in normal healthy subjects. Diabetology 1993, 36, 857-862. 22 Elias E., Gibson G. J., Greenwood L. F., Hunt J. N., Tripp J. H. The Slowing of Gastric Emptying by Monosaccharides and Disaccharides in Test Meals. J. Physiol 1968, 194, 317-326. 23 Breener W., Hendricks T.R., McHugh P.R. Regulation of the Gastric Emptying of Glucose. Gastroenterology 1983, 85, 76-82. 24 McHugh P.R., Moran Th. Calories and Gastric Emptying, a Regulatory Capacity with Implications for Feeding. AMJ Physiol 1979, 236, R254 R260. 25 Sponheimer M., Leethorpe J.A. Isotopic Evidence for the Diet of an Early Hominid, Australopithecus africanus. Science 1999, 283, 368-370. 26 Cordain L., Eaton S.B., Sebastian A., Mann N., Lindeberg S., Watkins B.A., ETAL Origins and Evolution of the Western Diet, Health Implications for the 21st Century. AMJ Klein Nutter 2005, 81, 341-354. 27 Simopoulos AP Genetic Variation and Nutrition. Nuttarev 1999, 57, S10 S19. 28 Eaton S.B., Connor M., Shostak M. Stoneacres in the Fast Lane, Chronic Degenerative Diseases in Evolutionary Perspective. AMJ Med 1988, 84, 739-749. 29 Mannheimer EU, Van Z. Uren E.J., Fedorowicz Z., Pidgel H. Paleolithic Nutrition for Metabolic Syndrome, Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. AMJ Klein Nutter 2015, 102, 922-932. 30 Beard T.C. A Salt Hypertension Hypothesis. J. Cardiovasc Pharmacol 1990, 16, S35 S38. 31 Oliver W. J., Cohen L., Neil J. B. Blood pressure, sodium intake, and sodium-related hormones in the Yanomamo Indians, a no-salt culture. Circulation 1975, 52, 146-151. 32 Delia L., Galetti F., Strazzolo P. Dietary salt intake and risk of gastric cancer. Cancer Treat Res 2014, 159, 83-95. 33 Packer M. Potential role of potassium as a determinant of morbidity and mortality in patients with systemic hypertension and congestive heart failure. AMJ Cardial 1990, 65, 45E51E. 34 De Wardener He, McGregor G. Harmful effects of dietary salt in addition to hypertension. J. Hum Hypertense 2002, 16, 213-223. 35 Hunt J.N., Pathak J.D. The osmotic effects of some simple molecules and ions on gastric emptying. J. Physiol 1960, 154, 254-269. 36 Gray GM Carbohydrate digestion and absorption. Role of the small intestine. An English J. Med 1975, 292, 1225-1230. 37 Colbert J. A. McLean De Role of caloric content on gastric emptying in humans. J. Physiol 1997, 498, 553-559. 38 Ferran Nina E., Barrett E., Bevilacqua S., Dupre J., Defronzo Ra. Sodium elevates the plasma glucose response to glucose ingestion in man. J. Clin Endocrinol Metab 1982, 54, 455-458. 39 O'Connor L., Imamura F., Lentjisma, K.T., Wareham, New Jersey, 40 NG. Prospective associations and population impact of sweet beverage intake and type 2 diabetes, and effects of substitutions with alternative beverages. Diabetology 2015, 58, 1474-1483. 40 Wang M., U.M., Fang L., Hu Reassociation between sugar-sweetened beverages and type 2 diabetes, a meta-analysis. J. Diabetes Investig 2015, 6, 360-366. 41 Grimes C.A., Riddle L.J., Campbell K.J., Nausen C.A. Dietary salt intake, sugar-sweetened beverage consumption, and obesity risk. Pediatrics 2013, 131, 14-21. 42 Ambrosen I.G.L., Audi W.H., Huang R.C., Mori Ta, Balin L.J., Jeb S.A. Prospective associations between sugar-sweetened beverage intakes and cardiometabolic risk factors in adolescence. AMJ Clin Nutr 2013, 98, 327-334. 43 De Koning L., Malik V.S., Kellogg M.D., Remy B., Willett W.C., Hu F.B. Sweetened beverage consumption, incident coronary heart disease, and biomarkers of risk in men. Circulation 2012, 125, 1735-1741. 44 Kosova E.C., Auinger P., Bremer A. The relationships between sugar-sweetened beverage intake and cardiometabolic markers in young children. J. Academic Nutri Diet 2013, 113, 219-227. 45 Grimes C.A., Wright J.D., Luke A., Nausen C.A., Loria C.M. Dietary sodium intake is associated with total fluid and sugar-sweetened beverage consumption in U.S. children and adolescents aged 2 to 18. Y. N. Haynes 2005-2008. AMJ Clin Nutr. 2013, 98, 189-196. 46 EFJ, Marrero NM, McGregor GA salt intake is related to soft drink consumption in children and adolescents, a link to obesity. Hypertension 2008, 51, 629-634. 47 Editorial. What can evolutionary theory do for public health? Lancet 2017, 394-30. 48 Wells JCK, Nis RM, Sear R, Johnstone RA, Stearns SC Evolutionary Public Health, Introducing the Concept. Lancet 2017, 390, 500-509. 49 Jasienska Bribieskas RG, Ferbergay S, Heli S, Núñez de la Mora A Human Reproduction and Health, An Evolutionary Perspective. Lancet 2017, 390, 510-520. 50 Rookji, Bak F, Levin BR, McFall Guy MJ, McLean AR Evolution, Human Microbe Interactions, and Life History Plasticity. Lancet 2017, 390, 521-530. 51 Editorial. Research Matters, Challenges of Replication. Lancet 2017, 389, 882. 52 Yang Q, Zhangzi, Greg U, Flanders WD, Merritt R, Hu FB. Added sugar intake and cardiovascular diseases mortality among U.S. adults. JAMA InternMed 2014, 174, 516-524. 53 Thurundar NV, Thomas D. The link between dietary sugar intake and cardiovascular disease mortality, an unresolved question. JAMA 2015, 313, 959-960. 54 Avena NM, Potenza MN, Gold MS. Why are we consuming so much sugar despite knowing too much can harm us? JAMA InternMed 2015, 175, 145-146. 55 Yang Q, Zhangzi, Hu FB. Why are we consuming so much sugar despite knowing too much can harm us? Reply. JAMA InternMed 2015, 175, 146. 56 McCarthy M. Higher sugar intake linked to raised risk of cardiovascular mortality, study finds. BMJ 2014, 348, G1352. 57 Mearns BM Public Health, increased risk of cardiovascular death in adults who eat high levels of added sugar. NatRev Cardial 2014, 11, 187. 58 Schmidt LA. New Unsweetened Truths About Sugar. JAMA InternMed 2014, 174, 525-526. 59 Grande F, Anderson JT, Keys A sucrose and various carbohydrate-containing foods and serum lipids in man. AMJ Clin Nutra 1974, 27, 1043-1051. 60 Dunnigan MG, 5T, McKitty MT, Crosby SM. The effects of isocaloric exchange of dietary starch and sucrose on glucose tolerance, plasma insulin, and serum lipids in man. Clin-Sci 1970, 38, 1-9. 61 Daily Me, Vale C, Walker M, Littlefield A, Alberti KGMM, Mathers JC. Acute effects on insulin sensitivity and diurnal metabolic profiles of a high sucrose compared with a high starch diet. AMJ Clin Nutra 1998, 67, 1186-1196. 62 Baschetti are gender differences in gastric emptying. Urj Nuclemed 1999, 26, 295-296. 63 Baschetti are gastric emptying, gender differences. NZ Met J 1997, 110, 238. 64 Reiser S, Hallfrisch J, Michaelis OE, Lazar FL, Martin Re, Prather ES. Isocaloric exchange of dietary starch and sucrose in humans. I effects on levels of fasting blood lipids. AMJ Klinnutter 1979, 32, 1659 to 1669. 65 Dronowski A, Belial F. Liquid calories, sugar, and body weight. AMJ Klinnutter 2007, 85, 651 to 661. 66 Phillips W.T., Schwartz J.G., Blumhardt R., McMahon C.A. Determining gastric emptying rate. J. Nuckelmed 1991, 32, 2025.